You know the way people say there was always a book before the book? So there was a show before the show. If you're going to do something new, it's always going to fail. They're going to kill all your ideas. I was like, well, what do you want from me? And she's like, I want you to stop doing your stupid show.
Welcome to the Innovation Show. I'm not Aidan McCullen.
I'm also not Aidan McCullen.
I'm Scott Wolfson. This is Kes Sampanthar, my best friend and partner in Possibility. We host a show called Tech Tonic, the AI thought show with Kes and Scott, and Aidan was gracious enough to be the first guest on the first episode of our second season, and then offered us this opportunity to do a bit of a remix, not unlike he used to do back in the day, with that conversation.
One of the greatest things about Aidan is he is just shy of 600 shows of the Innovation Show. But the full story of Aidan's origin has not been done. And that's the opportunity we had in this amazing conversation with him.
It's nearly 10 years now. So early days interviews, you're trying to find your feet, and you're not really, I mean, not intentionally trying to find your feet. You're doing the best with the tools you have. And you're asking questions with the knowledge that you have available to you. For me back then, it was mainly functional. So I'd worked in nearly a decade in digital transformation. So I was asking from there, and then books I'd read, articles I'd read, etc. But I hadn't really layered on lens on top of lens of what I do now. So in the early days of the book, sometimes you'd interview people, the title looks great, and then you'd realize they didn't even write the book. So a lot of times they had a ghostwriter, and you'd ask questions, they kind of go, oh yeah, maybe we'll skip that question. And I was like going, oh, okay. So you become more discerning with what books you choose. And I saw this, there's actually, it's on YouTube, it's Carl Sagan. And Carl Sagan says, he shows a library like you guys have and I have here. And he goes, in your lifetime, you're only capable of reading this amount of books. Most people. And he said, so choose your books wisely. And it was just one of those moments I went, oh, okay. So I decided, I was like, I know I have those books. I know I have a lot of authors lined up to speak to, but I actually need to reshuffle my thinking about this. So those kind of little tips were things you just kind of stumbled into over the years.
Well, I want to like jump off right from that point, Aidan, because I spent a little bit of time with the Innovation Show last night, and I created a Goodreads shelf with nice. As many of the books as I could, 382 of them.
I should have done that, man. You're making me look bad here.
Well, how could I make you look bad, Aidan? Because you were the one who chose all of these books, and it's a fascinating peek into your brain. So, how did you start? Like when I scroll all the way down on SoundCloud, right? Here's your intro theme, and then episode number 1 with Seth Godin. Like, how did that even happen? That's amazing.
Well, you know the way people say there was always a book before the book? So there was a show before the show, and the show for me started. So I'll tell you the origin story, because actually it's a story of resistance to change and a story of being told you can't do it by the powers, right? So I joined the national broadcaster here, and within a week I knew, oh man, this was a mistake. Everything, like I remember feeling the energy in the room and kind of going, oh my God, what is this? It must be the high ceilings or something like that. But it was just this low frequency of energy, of fear, of untapped potential in people, and a leader that actually tried to keep them there, to keep them in check, because therefore she'd have more power. And she had this board, and on the board were, again, a mix of sycophants, people, yes, men and women, and then people who were afraid of telling the truth. And I came from a totally different business before, and I came from an entrepreneurial media company where you tried and you kept doing stuff. And if you weren't doing stuff, you weren't doing much. So I came to this different environment, and it was a public broadcaster. And I was asked to come up with an idea for the player we were building, which was like a Netflix. So I said straight away, I was like, oh, well, it's got to be as good as Netflix. You know that. It can't be subpar because that's the bar for people now. And on top of that, you have to pay a license fee for this national broadcaster. So I was asked to come up with this idea. I had nothing to do with it. I was like, you know, we have all these people living in Ireland now who aren't Irish, who are craving content that is educational and somewhat edutainment. And I said this idea of the innovation show, I said it's really nice for sponsors as well, because most shows, when you hear the word innovation, people think of technology. I was like, it's a mix of technology, resistance to change, strategy, theories behind technology, etc. So I was told straight away, we tried that before. And I was like, going, there it is. Because my old boss, who I left really well with before, he remembers saying, they're going to kill all your ideas. And he appeared to me in this little cloud, like in The Simpsons, going, ha ha. And I was like, going, no, man, I'm not letting this happen. So this was in the digital department. And a guy who worked for that entrepreneur he ran one of the radio stations. So I walked down to him in the radio station, and I just said to him, I said, Dan is his name, Dan Healy, great guy. I said, Dan, I had a one pager. I was like, what do you think of this idea? And it was just a few lines of what the themes would be, what the format would be, etc. And he goes, great idea. He says, we have no content like that. He said, what kind of budget do you have? And I was like, oh, well, I was going to ask you that. What budget do you have? And he goes, have you got a presenter? And I said, no, that's what I was meeting you about. And he goes, why don't you do it? And I was like, oh no, man, I've never done anything like that before. And he said, but you do rugby commentary. So I used to be a co-commentator on rugby. And co-comment's quite easy. I mean, all you're doing is commentating on specific parts after the fact, like a great move or a try or the equivalent of a touchdown. So it's kind of much easier. But with the show, you're the anchor. So he goes, I'll tell you what, I'll give you a loan of a producer, this guy, Alan Swan. I'll give you Alan for 6 weeks. He'll help you get set up, and then you're on your own. So I started that, did that show. And again, what I started to do was scan the internet for incoming people into Ireland who were speaking at events. And then I'd either go to the event, get in a taxi and bring them to the studio, or I'd order them a taxi and bring them to the studio and interview them and send them home in a taxi. And they were great. They were delighted because it was national broadcaster, national access. So that's how it started. And the best thing about this was I didn't tell anyone. So I didn't tell my boss or anything like that. I just, the whole idea, ask for forgiveness, not permission. I had that branded into my brain. So I do this, and a few weeks later, we're having this meeting again, and my boss goes, "Hey, how's that idea coming along, the innovation show?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, great! It's on episode 13, and it's top of the tech charts." She nearly had an aneurysm. It was great. But in doing so, I always talk about this stuff on my show, that idea of asking for forgiveness, not permission, is not actually a great idea, because you run out of runway. And I soon ran out of runway then, because I had no support then, because I had done this thing done it behind the scenes, tried to build it, thinking that was quite a good thing. And then I'd be able to go, but it's successful. So what she tried to do then is move me off it and hand it over and find somebody to run the show. So pretty soon I was like going, this isn't working, this relationship, this job. And I was given an ultimatum actually to go. I was like, well, what do you want from me? And she's like, I want you to stop doing your stupid show. I want you to stop writing. Because that's when I started writing first, actually, because I was trying to find another medium for this brilliant content I'd stumbled upon. So when you're doing interviews, you pull out nuggets and they mix with your own ideas, and then you can create something new. The whole idea of that combinatory thinking. So you're combining different ideas together. So I'd start to write that and publish that. And she wanted me to stop doing that. And she's like, and I want you to sit out there like everyone else. And I kind of did one of these slow head turns and looked out to everyone else and was kind of going, I don't think that's a good idea. So I left. And I want to say this, it's so hard to leave because it was what we call in Ireland a cushy number. So a cushioned job, great pension, no stress for people who don't want to achieve things, but stressful for someone who wants to build something. So really stressful for me. I couldn't stand it. And the biggest challenge for something like that is I have 2 kids and a wife. And when you're going and you're taking what's really a selfish decision to go, I can't do this. I will rot. My brain will rot away if I do this. And you have this, I remember having this moment. I was in the gym and I looked in the mirror and I was like, okay, just suck it up. Just we'll do this. And then I said, I can't. And it was like my reflection was talking about to me, man, we can't do this. So I pulled out of it and went on, and it was the best thing I ever did. And years later, actually, it was revealed that there were so many problems in that organization that it was validated. And so many people got in touch with me and were like, oh, well done for leaving, but at the time, so difficult. And these are the challenges you face when you take these entrepreneurial pursuits. So that's how the show started. That was the show before the show, and just the Seth Godin piece. So I reached out to Seth. I'd followed him for a long, long time. I'd read most of his books, and I reached out to him. I knew he answered his emails. And here's the thing I did. I interviewed a lady who wrote a book on how to write perfect emails. And I'd interviewed her on the other show, and I used her format to email Seth. And Seth came back immediately and said yes. And I was like, oh, yes. So I went, I'll record that. I'll put that out as my first new show, the Innovation Show. And at the last show of the previous incarnation, I announced, I said, look, the show's closing down. Thanks to everybody for all their help. Thanks Alan, thanks Dan, the guys who made the show possible, and all the guests that we had. And I said, watch out for me on LinkedIn and Twitter. I'm going to release something new soon. And then about a week later, release this new show. And that's where it came from. So there's always a book before the book, or a show before the show.
I love that. I definitely want that book. I don't know if you remember the author of, I reached out to Seth very early on when I was designing one of my first startups. And I shared with him, and I got really excited about Purple Cow. I created a Purple Cow marketing plan around how I'm going to launch this innovation tool, and sent it to him. And he always responds, but he was like, his response was like, "Oh, this is really cool."
Go for it, ship it, buddy. Hey, you should show for those people watching us your special editions of the Purple Cow. I don't think people have seen that. Are they easily accessible there? I thought that was so cool.
I can get it. Give me 1 second.
Well, and that's perfect timing, because I'm gonna jump into a question that I think is going to wind its way throughout the rest of the conversation, because that book before the book, the show before the show. When did you start to have a relationship with the concept of reinvention? Like, is there a time that you can think back to where it started to click?
Well, it's easier to look back now, Scott, and say, oh, I have a theory. And you actually don't know when it actually happens. But the thing I talk about in the book is that one of the great gifts that is actually seen as a huge struggle is, as a professional sports player of any type of player, and anybody who changes career dramatically, that when you know there's an end coming, that you have to prepare for that. And the idea of reinvention for me is it's in this idea of the show before the show, or the book before the book, like you say, that it's really characterized by this metaphor of the phoenix that I absolutely love. And the phoenix is this mythical creature, as you know, that every 500 years willingly walks into the flames from the ashes of what it used to have. So it's created this persona, or this entity, the show, and is willing to burn it up to absolute nothingness again, but keep what is absolutely useful, only what's useful, to actually go on to enjoy a new incarnation, another 500 years of life. And that is very, very much at the heart of everything that I do, is that what you've done in a world of rapid change has a shelf life, and it will burn up, it will be over, it will be no longer fit for purpose. And you have to be willing to put energy into it, but know that it's not going to last forever. And you're going to have to constantly change, because the world's changing, you're changing, and the product itself is then out of sync, out of line. And there's a Jack Welch quote that I love, whether people love Jack Welch or not, but there's a quote that he had, that if the rate of change on the outside exceeds the rate of change on the inside, the end is near. And I think that quote encapsulates this kind of moving world, business world or society. And then if you on the inside, you personally are not updating your mental models to be able to match, to be able to see those in context, you're going to be out of sync. And this is kind of this whiplash effect. And you're going to see this blurred version of what could be reality. So I think that's the source of everything. And we'll talk about this in a while, the idea of kintsugi thinking, which is really the source of all this. And you had this yourself with your work in TV that is now paying off. That's kintsugi thinking. It's like the thing I did ages ago that I thought was over, dead and buried, cropped up again in a way to help me today that I never could have ever considered. I never could have predicted. And we usually tell these post-rationalized stories of I planned it, everything. You're kind of go, no, you didn't. It's an absolute luck that we came across this.
So here's the Purple Cow marketing. His Purple Cow marketing book is still inside. This is one of the sealed ones. And, you had to buy 12 of them, which I love as a marketing idea. And I gave them away with my business plan. So as I went and asked people for funding and support or join the project, I would send them my Purple Cow marketing plan with the milk carton. And, basically, I had to tell people to open it. Because I realized the first one I sent, it was actually a friend of the family's, and he was like, yeah, look, the marketing plan makes sense. I love the milk carton. I gave it to my grandson. I was like, did he read the book inside? He goes, oh, there was a book inside? I thought you just sent me a milk carton.
Brilliant. It's such a great idea. And, I'd say have you checked what they're worth on eBay? I'd say they're worth a few bob now.
I have not checked. It's
NFT those bad boys.
Well, I want to say is like free prize inside was also a cereal box.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Because unfortunately, I think I only, for some reason, I only have one, and it's opened. So I'm not sure you did that same model where you had to buy a couple of them. But again, it was like a cereal box with a free prize inside, which is a book, which I love. Growing up, in our generation, it's the prizes inside cereal boxes. So
love it.
Now, Seth Godin has been a hero of mine and inspiration for so long.
He is. I love the idea of being remarkable. The simplicity of it, that somebody will remark about it. It's remarkable. And that if you try to do that, one of the things I think about him, and one thing we should all strive for is, and I didn't do this in sport enough, is that you actually only really make progress when you embrace who you are, and you stop trying to emulate somebody else, that you create something totally unique, that's it's you in it. And I think that's what he really did. He just embraced himself, and he embraced his way of doing things, and then just kept doing the work. That's the thing. People miss the discipline behind something like him, like a blog every day. And it's even going through Christmas there every day. So that means planning to go, I'm going to write something every day, because it's not just filler. You unsubscribe from so many newsletters that you receive today because there's so much information, but his things are always well considered, and that takes huge discipline.
He's like, he works for like 15 hours a day, even now.
Wow. Yeah.
And, that's how he gets to write so many things, write so many books. It's pretty impressive.
Yeah. Scott, man, I took you way off. I do this off piece too. My mind works that way. Kind of go, but I'll come back. I always come back if I have enough time.
As we figured out a couple of years ago, unfortunately, the term tangential thinking has some unfortunate baggage because it's typically more associated with schizophrenia. But I like that term, and where you went with it, that you embody this notion that Kes and I have been calling nerd jamming for a few years. Like the way that we got through COVID in particular was literally talking every day and, just finding ways to get through it. And, so it is that sort of tangential thinking. It is divergent thinking. And it is a double-edged sword. And you've got that. So how have you balanced that narrow laser-like focus with the wide lens, like one of your incredible guests, Ron Adner, wrote about?
Yeah. So I think and it's a nice segue, man. Nice job on the discipline thing, because a good way to think about this is a team I played for they are the best team in the world. They're absolutely incredible. Is Toulouse, Stade Toulousain, a French team. And they're even better now than they were then. I don't have many regrets, but I kind of look and I'd love to play in their current setup that they have now, because they just have perfect culture, the way of playing, the style of playing, really good mix of players as well. But people look at them, and there's a term, jouer, which just means to play in French. And people will say, oh, that's a real style of jouer, where they just play free-flowing rugby. It's like freestyle jazz. But to do that, you have to have unbelievable discipline in the incremental jobs that everybody does. Everybody needs to know their job really, really well. And then they're led by this overarching kind of strategy or North Star of how we play. And the way I kind of translate that into business is the same thing, that you have to show up and do the work every day, making sure it's the right work that we talked about before we came on air. Make sure that that's the right work, but then you're driven by some type of North Star, some type of blurry vision of what the future looks like. And for me, with any kind of tangential thinking, is I do the reading, but I actually read it. And I was actually thinking about this recently. Somebody was saying, oh, I read that book you told me to read. And I was like thinking, I wonder what he means by he read it. As in, you can flick through a book and go, yeah, it's read, tick, it's task output thinking, or whatever you would say, versus qualitative reading it. And I think one of the great gifts that you guys will discover as you do more and more of your shows as well, is that when you read, knowing that you're going to actually interview the person and you're taking notes, and then you write about it yourself, that it's this beautiful combination of, you have to actually really consider the questions, and you have to really consider the quotes. Because if you're reading the book, like sometimes I have tons of quotes, and then you have to go, oh, what do I leave out? Which is really difficult. But you're gathering this content each week. And then I purposely write about it. I try to, like, at any one time, right now, I've about 300 articles in draft. And they're all driven by some type of concept that I have, some metaphor, or some quote from some book. And sometimes I'll leave them there. And like even last week, about 3 years later, something somebody says in a show, I'll go, I think I might have a draft of that. And then I go looking through my drafts and I go, yes, I'll finish that one off. And that, for me, that's a real dopamine hit. I get this real reward of that. Total nerd. Like, yes, that's perfect. I can finish that. And what's beautiful is when you bring like 3 or 4 of guests' quotes that are unique to you, because they're not quotes that you've pulled from Goodreads or some brainy quote or something like that. That the quotes you've actually found yourself, and then you've infused them into an article that makes sense. And I think the practice of that, Scott, over years, I'm doing that now since the time I left that organization that I told you about. So nearly 10 years I'm doing that, is that it becomes a way of thinking then, because you've actually trained it. You've trained yourself to think that way. So somebody will say something and I'll be like going, And it's so bad now. My wife said to me, she said to me recently, somebody will say something and she go, oh, Aidan will probably write a blog about that. So yeah, but it's also so good, right? So in my book, there's this concept of this beautiful creature that is, I use it as this symbol of permanent reinvention, called the immortal jellyfish, Toratopsis dohrnii, right? That came from my son, who at the time was about 10. He was just about 10. And he came to me and he said, Dad, you can't use the phoenix. The phoenix is a myth. He says, I found a real creature. And he showed me, because he used to watch stuff on YouTube, and he showed me the YouTube, and I was watching, I was like going, oh my God, that's genius. Like, but the fact that just by having somebody in your surroundings that knew what you were doing, but could capture it from the eyes of a 10-year-old and give me that lens, it was just an incredible gift. And there's so much of my kids in the book, actually, because they were constantly saying stuff to me all the time. And I'd be like going, from the mouths of babes, so making it that simple was great as well. So I'm constantly scanning, and I'm not purposely scanning either, Scott. Like, I'm constantly scanning, because once that's turned on, that lens, you can't turn it off again. And I think that's the beautiful thing. I think it was Emerson said, once the mind is stretched by a new idea, it never returns to its original dimensions. Eric Kandel, the Nobel laureate, he said that when you receive just one new bit of information, your brain never ever goes back to its former self. It advances in ways remarkable. And I think that's the source of the work that we do, that both the show or running workshops or keynotes or any kind of lecturing, is that you're changing how people see the world for the better. And if you're driven by that service of, I want to do this so you see it for the better, that's beautiful. So you can see how all this, to me, it's the same stuff. It all comes together and it culminates in the work that I do.
It's fascinating. So interesting enough, the prototype game I created and sent to Seth Godin. So there's only 3 copies. I think Scott's got one now. It's sold out. So I only created I think 500 of these things. And it's a creativity game. And so slightly different to how you think about it. It's like all of these books are randomized. Like there's no organization, because I realized I'd read books and I'd pluck out ideas. It's like similar to you. And sort of like, I read this book 3 times. I got 3 different copies, and there's different Post-it notes and things in there. And it's like, because different ideas like jump out at you. And I started collecting those ideas into an idea library. And as a game designer, I was like, oh, I can create a game out of this. And I created this creativity combinatory play game, which was what I do looking at my bookshelf. So,
Brilliant. Yeah. So that's your lens.
Like, I saw that in your book. Like, I loved all these analogies you brought in. I can kind of see how you connect dots. Seen it in your blog post since then as well. It's like, like I can see like that sparks that idea.
The way you're thinking, yeah. But isn't that? I think that's really nice when you can see how somebody's thinking, because you actually have no idea. Most of us assume people think the same as us, or are just on a totally different level, and they are. One of the things maybe I'll share with our audience, because we were talking about this before we came on air. One of the huge drivers for me was my first job after professional rugby was digital transformation. We didn't call it that yet. It was just a job. Like, I don't think even the organization called it that, because I actually went in, I couldn't get a job. It was 2008. I had loads of jobs lined up, by the way. So I'd done loads of work preparing for the end. And then the end came in this period of absolute chaos, where not only was the jobs no longer there, the organizations that I'd planned to join were gone. They shut down. They were advertising agencies, etc. So this is the whole idea of creative destruction, that this was destroyed, but in the rubble, there was something that actually set me on a totally different path. So I got into digital transformation, because I was told traditional advertising was going to be struggling. And in every organization I walked into, I'd see this like corner of these kind of snot-nosed punks. And I was like, who are those kids? And they're like, oh, they're the digital guys. And I was like, what do they do? And they're like, we don't know yet. And I was like, and then I had a little notebook. I used to bring around a notebook, and I'd go, because because of the rugby, I had access to the leaders of these organizations. I go, would you mind me asking you how much are they earning? And then they'd tell me. And then I realized that for their age, they were earning way more pro rata than people who would have started traditionally. And I needed that because my only source of income then was I was a coach. So I had to coach at the end. And I was very lucky that my former club, Lansdowne Rugby Club, they gave me a coaching role, and I got some money from that because I was on 18 grand in this starting job. So I had to find some way to try and just meet my basic needs of mortgages and stuff like that. And a kid on the way, like, can you imagine the chaos? And then the whole world's ending, with 2008, 2009. So it was madness. And so in there, I was work shadowing this guy who was outsourcing everything. So he's outsourcing all the advertising to advertising agencies. And then I'd kind of meet the agencies, and I realized that they were learning on our dime, really, and then I was like, why would we do that? Like, this is nuts. Like, we need that expertise in the organization, because we had 44 radio stations. I was like, we need that skill set inside. So let's build an internal agency. So pretty soon they were like, the consultant who was doing this work moved on, and they were kind of going, who are we gonna get to do this now? And I'm like, I'll do it. And they're like, what do you know? And I was like, well, I know one thing. I'm a few Google searches ahead of all the rest of you guys. and I'm dedicated to those Google searches. So that's what I did, and I just focused on that. But out of that, then built this new agency within the agency. And yeah, so digital was at the heart of everything I did. But here's the thing I wanted to share was, so when I got to really interesting projects, I'll give you one example. Total failure, but it was a great idea, right? It was called, we had a radio station called News Talk, and I had this idea where, and it wasn't unique, by the way. I wanted to build a platform that could be used in multiple ways across several of the radio stations. So one of them was, we had a station called Spin, and it was a younger station that played kind of like dance music and stuff like that. So I met the labels, and I asked the labels, would they give us song parts? So you could go in and sign up for this platform, and you could download the song parts, remix them, upload them again, and then there'd be a competition, you'd be voting, etc., and then the winning song would be played every week, right? So great, really worked really well. Then I wanted to use the exact same format, but this time for a different station, this News Talk station, and people would send in their own reports, stuff they'd seen, videos, photos, etc. And I actually got Nokia to sponsor it back then. It just shows you how long ago it was. And Nokia sponsored this with this brand new phone that they had, which was after the iPhone. Interestingly, most videos that were sent in were iPhone videos. So anyway, we did those things, but when I did those, I actually didn't engage the station, and I didn't get real context about how it worked in a station like that, and the real levers that you needed to pull on that. But worst of all, I didn't have the language to explain what this was. And this had come from books I'm sure you've read, like Wikinomics, and reading books like that around crowdsourcing and understanding that the power of the crowd, if you infuse them into your station, you create something new. And I don't think anybody's still actually done it, by the way. I think there's probably a real opportunity to be hard to do today with fake news, etc., and deep fakes. But the idea I still think is really sound. But I didn't have a way to articulate it in a way that was in their language, the people I was talking to. So it always looked like it was for me, and I was trying to sell advertising on the back of it. That's what they saw when they saw me come in. But actually, what I was trying to do was go, all the rising tide lifts all of us. That if we have more revenue, we can invest more in the digital platforms, we can build more apps, we can engage more audience, we can build more digital audience. And it was only later when I had started reading books, I started reading really old HBR articles. Going back to the start of HBR, I found somebody online had uploaded every old HBR articles and actually had scanned them in with PDFs. So I read all those, started reading stuff, started upgrading, and that's what I was saying to you, that I started to level up then. And the owner of our station then brought us to Harvard, and we did a course over in Harvard for a weekend. And that was a game changer for me, because it was, again, new lenses. And it introduced me to the power of education then as well, that when you educate people, then you get them onto the same level. Because after that was a pivotal moment. When we came back after that, and a few of the senior execs had been on it together, we were speaking the same language. And they knew that you were on a same strategic page as them. So that was kind of like again, one of these kind of failures that was reframed into a success, that you can see those things, you can look at them and go, oh, that was a total bomb, or else you can go, well, it was only by actually creating the chaos that was able to pull some order out of it. Because if you're going to do something new, it's always going to fail. So I think that's really at the heart of the work I do. And even with my kids, I say to them, you're always going to be bad at something at the start. Like, you have to go through this rite of passage where it's going to feel uncomfortable and you're going to feel terrible about yourself. But the people who actually do well are the people who realize that. And it's like this, as I say in the book, it's a milestone, not a millstone. So you see it and you kind of go, I reached that messy kind of middle that just comes before the dawn. And I think that's really important.
One of the things I recognize about you, and it's something which Scott and I have been, I've been dealing with longer, I got Scott into reading a lot, is this concept of being an autodidact. Like, my research and my degree is computer science and artificial intelligence, which for a good, after I lost funding for my PhD because neural networks was never going to work, apparently. So deep learning wasn't going to be a thing. And my head of department wrote a letter and got my funding. Anyway, long story, but basically AI was done in my eyes. And I started learning on my own. I realized I learned more after university than I learned anytime during all the way up to that point. I learned neuroscience. I went back and studied that. I studied economics and then strategy and innovation and creativity. And I found it fascinating how people react to it. And one of the things is that sort of challenge. We're so used to being credentialed. I started doing all those TED Talks because I'd worked out this new neuroscience research on how our motivational system works. I'd actually talked to neuroscientists. I'd been working on game design for a long time, created this thing for games myself, and then transferred it to, digital experiences. And it was this sort of, I think it was at one of those TED events where, I'd been explaining my idea, I'd done a talk there, and this lady was pushed at me and goes, "But you're not a neuroscientist." I was like, "No, but look," and then it was kind of like this, she was like, "Yeah, you're not credible." And that sort of knocked me back on my heels because, I try to source my materials. I never claimed to be one. I want to draw on those ideas. I was excited to share them when I came out. So my question to you is, as I looked at a lot of the things you've done, is what does it feel like to be an autodidact in a world where everybody's like, oh, you have to go and take a degree to learn that?
Yeah, well, it's happened in ways that I didn't probably even perceive. There's this great story of the deaf frog. Have you ever heard the story of the deaf frog? It's great. I love this, right? Well, I was saying there was a book before the book. I originally wrote a book that was how could you play international rugby when you're not very good at sport, right? That wasn't the title, but that was the concept, because I wanted to show children that wanted to pursue something that I was last picked on the playground. I wasn't very good at sport, dyspraxic, like lacking, like you would never go, that guy will do well. And, you know, I always love the quote by Buckminster Fuller, there's nothing in a caterpillar that tells you it's going to be a butterfly, because you don't know what that person's projecting from inside, what they're seeing. And I always, you know, these lists that you see this time of year, like top 10 ways to be happy, and it's like moderate alcohol, sleep well, blah, blah, blah. The one thing I never ever see in that is it's the internal story you're telling yourself that is this you're projecting onto the world. It's your thoughts. It's actually how you deal with regret, how you deal with setbacks, how you deal with the relationship with your mother-in-law, all those things that actually chip at your energy. I think that that's so important. And I think that's also the same ingredient that's needed in you, that you have to have a belief. And sometimes that belief comes from ignorance, which is the deaf frog story, which is there was this competition from frogs where they had to jump out of the well, and nobody had ever achieved this. And so this deaf frog, it's his turn, and he's him going for it, and everybody's kind of sniggering at him, but he doesn't know that because he can't hear them, right? Which is great. So he starts jumping from leaf to leaf. Then he gets onto the stones. He gets closer to the tip of the well. They're all screaming. He sees everybody screaming at him. He's like, going, yeah. Gets to the top, achieves it. First frog that ever achieves it. And afterwards, they come up to him and they sign to him, and they're like, going, why didn't you listen to us when we were telling you you'd never make it? And he's like, going, I thought you were cheering me on. And I love that story for the fact that when you do stuff that is beyond your realm of expertise, like you did there, is that you will always have that lady in the crowd. You'll always have somebody like that. But actually, when you kind of go, I don't care. I know that I'm speaking with a place of authority. And by the way, I'm saying this not from a position of, I'm saying that this from a place of humility, because when you're a professional rugby player, people expect you to be that all the time. They don't actually see that, well, that was a period in time that, you know, that ended in my 30s. That ended in my early 30s. I'm now nearly 50. Like, come on. That's 2 decades of life has moved on almost from since then. So what have I done with that time is more the question. And when you go through, for me, the experience that similar to you, Kes and Scott, with your experiences, is that you have some role that you're playing, some job that you're doing. You're picking up tacit, implicit knowledge all the time. You may not have a language for it. You may not have theories to be able to stick to the knowledge. And I think that's really important. And I think the sequence in my evolution is really important, that I did the work. I experienced it firsthand, resistance, failure of articulating the strategy right, but getting buy-in, forgiveness, not permission, all those things that we talked about. But only later, when I started to read and became a voracious reader of the stuff, I was like going, oh man, how easier would it have been if I knew this stuff. But now I had this, it was like I had done the primer on the paint. I had the primer done, and now this was the first coat. And then every coat since then is adding more and more knowledge. But the world doesn't know that. And actually, in many, many cases, all they actually care about is the right outcome. So I'm sure I don't get talks and I don't get workshop gigs because maybe my credentials don't match. But I know that the work that I do, I know that I've read more than so many people in the world. There's probably a handful of people, maybe 100 people, who have read to the level that we read. Because the world is so full of distractions that to be able to do that means you're not doing a lot of other things. There's a huge amount of sacrifice that goes behind that. Drucker said, if you're going to do something new, you have to stop doing something old. So I don't do social media. I don't drink. I work when I'm working. I exercise every day. And one of the reasons I exercise is it gets more out of my learning then. after I've exercised. So I'm more focused. I take in the learning more. I take notes. I then have the amazing privilege to interview the people. And then it just sticks, and the knowledge sticks. And then, as we talked about earlier, you're writing about it. You're creating your own version of that story, keeping the core message behind it. And then it becomes yours in that you can articulate it, no problem. So in the early days, Kes, what I say, the humility piece is I was so wary of, they're just going to think you're this washed up rugby player who's going to give a talk about what's transferable skills between rugby and the real world. And you know, a lot of times that happens with professional players, and like they have never worked in the real world, which is like, how can you then speak with authority about what it's like in the real world when you don't know what it's like? You know, you as a sports player, most people want to do that job. You're then driving change in an organization, an old organization. Most people are just showing up for the paycheck. You know, so it's a totally different thing. How do you drive change in a place like that? Is totally different than, you know, being a leader on a pitch where everybody wants to be there, everybody wants to be the best. Totally different. So one of the reasons I started to learn, and my wife only actually said this to me, really, she didn't realize this, was because I felt I had such a deficit, because I felt I had to make up for this lack of knowledge that I thought everybody else had. And then I realized actually they don't have it because they're not reading. And that, I don't mean that in a derogatory way. A lot of people don't have the time. And I'm so lucky that I've created a career that actually makes that time really important. So it's not like in the old days where I had to steal time wherever I could to read. Now it's part of my day. I read every single day. It's part of my day. It's essential part of my day. It's my competitive advantage now. I don't have the credentials to say that I did a course in that, whatever, but actually I realize more and more, once you deliver, and then the word of mouth between different clients, they speak to us and I go, no, this person will do a great job. Then it doesn't matter. They actually don't care as long as the outcome is great. So, and I think the people who look for credentials like that are actually just covering their own ass and maybe need to because their organization needs that, or else they don't know. So they're actually using the credential as the insurance in case they don't know how to do it. So that's how I deal with it. I think it was Marcus Aurelius said something like, you have great freedom once you let go of caring what other people think, and you just actually embrace yourself and you go, I am who I am. I'll do what I do. And there'll always be great work once you do great work because people will recommend you to others.
I mean, the deficit thing really resonated. Sorry, you were going to jump in, Scott. Go ahead.
Well, no, I was potentially gonna fork us a little bit, but if there's something you want to pull on, dive in.
Yeah, just really quickly, the deficit story kick. So I, as a kid, could not sit still. So I could never read. Like, you know, like they thought it was like, am I dyslexic and all of these different things. I did well in school because I focused on math, which was the least amount of reading I had to do. And my brother, who was 2 years older than me, like always read, always had a book by, always read. So it was like sometime in college, I was like, I had to do this reading. I had to read a book, which is unusual in computer science. And I was struggling. So I stayed at Easter term and I was like, I'm going to read. And it's like, it was really hard. And I remember going, I'm going to be like my brother. I'm going to try and read. I'm going to like create a program for myself to get into reading. And I started reading like Hitchhiker's Guides and all these books of other people. And it was like 10 years later, I'd kept that up and sort of built it out. 10 years later, I was talking to my brother and, you know, he like came over to the US and was visiting and looking at my library, which was much smaller then. And he was like, my God, how do you have time to read all of this? Oh, I just followed your lead. I basically said I always had to have a book in my hand and I wanted to constantly read. He goes, I haven't done that in like 25 years. And realized, but that whole thing of like starting out as academic failed and then having to go into the real world, feeling like I had to catch up because I was like, this is my superpower. I need to be able to read because everybody else is smarter than me about business.
So I'm running a workshop and there'll be, say, Scott's the CEO, and I go, say you walked into Scott's office and he's got his boots up on the windowsill and he's reading a book, and you walk in and you're like going, oh, it's well for some, Scott, you know, just because you're the CEO here, instead of actually going, he or she should do that every single day. They should do that. They should take 20 minutes, half an hour. More than that, they probably should meditate for 10, 20 minutes. If they were doing that, you'd be kind of going, oh, it's well for some. You own the business. No, everybody should be doing that, because you'll actually get more out of yourself in the day. And it's those shifts, those societal shifts, that it does take a crisis to make them happen. But I actually think COVID was one of those societal shifts, but it hasn't turned out the way that I think it should have, in that we should have more learning organizations as a result of this, and not weekends away, or not 2 or 3 days, like ongoing. Like do the days away. They're like the pit stops, and then the work's done on the track. Consistent learning on a regular basis, because it's the only way you can get better. It's behavior change. It's habit change. It's taking on new habits. And to take on a new habit, you usually have to get rid of an old one. So then the organization needs to step in and reshuffle how people work.
Well, and it's, you know, one of my many strong opinions, loosely held, is that despite however many people might self-identify as knowledge workers, that they don't think of themselves and they don't behave as what I consider to be a professional thinker. You know, so when you were playing rugby, when you were on the pitch, you were thinking about your body so much. There was a lot of mental training, of course. And to your point, that notion that so many people, you know, don't have the time, or what I have put on myself is, it's up to me to make the time to read. I am a professional thinker. I get paid to help people come up with better ideas. I get paid to ask better questions. And the best way to have a good idea or a good question is to have lots of ideas and lots of questions. And the best way, until we fast forward to the point where Kes and I aspire to have the matrix and literally jack knowledge, you know, download knowledge directly into our brains, the most efficient and effective method that I know of is reading. And I love, one of the many things that I've seen about you is that transfer, maybe not of knowledge, but of practice from the pitch to the boardroom.
Yeah. And you know, I was actually, my wife was kind of saying this to me recently. She's kind of going like, why are these people hiring you? Kind of thing, you know? And she meant it. She wasn't trying to be insulting. She kind of goes like, you know, it's not long ago since you were a professional rugby player. And I made me think about it. I was like, I can see this now in my kids. So my kids, neither of them were. One of them's quite athletic and physically gifted. The older one isn't. But he's now winning MMA and jiu-jitsu fights like brilliantly, strategically. He's studying them. He's doing the work in the gym. He's constantly training. Both of them are now. So I was able to say to her, you've seen the transformation in the kids, from these kids that weren't very good at sport to being the best now in their fields. That's partly behind that is what's called coachability. As a coach, if you're a coach, the one thing they'll always, their coaches, my kids' coaches will say to me is go, oh, they're great. They'll listen. I was going, well, it's great they listen to you. They don't listen so much at home, but they have what's called coachability, which is you will listen, you'll do the work, you're told what to do, you'll do it. Not only, and there's a big difference, and this is what I was saying about the reading. There's a big difference between showing up and training. Like, you go training, you're mentally present, you're taking on the knowledge, you realize when you do something wrong, you try to fix it. You realize you have a weakness, you stay back and you do 5 minutes extra passing or whatever it is, to try and to come up to speed with that weakness that you have. So that's coachability. It's the exact, and that's what I had. I was saying to you, I was late in my career. I only started playing rugby really when I was 16, and I played for Ireland when I was 23. So in that period of time, I came up to speed, and then I was playing for the best club in the world, Toulouse, a few years later. So that was pure discipline, showing up, doing the work, not doing lots of things that other people are doing, like drinking. Kes, your story about your brother, many people have an original talent, and they either don't realize they have that talent, or they get bored of it because they have their curse of early expertise or early talent, and they kind of get bored of it and they kind of go, oh, I'm sick of this thing now. I'll move on to something else. I think when you go through the rite of passage of earning it and struggling to it, you own it then, and you're not going to let it go because you're like going, I worked my butt off for this thing. So the transferable skill for me, Scott, was the coachability is the exact same as learnability. Learnability is the exact same thing. Because I wasn't really good at things, I had to actually break them down. And that's the partly the metaphorical thinking, is break it down into the way that I kind of go, oh, that's all that means. And then build the theory around it. And I think that's the real gift that you can have if you don't come from a position of authority at the start, because it actually lets you off the hook a bit. You can hide behind credentials, Kes, like you talked about, but the people who don't and who are really passionate about it, they're the people who really do really well. A place I said this first in my career was when I was working in transformation. I was saying to the stations, we should hire bloggers. We should hire bloggers as broadcasters. And they were like going, oh yeah, but they're not trained journalists. And I was like going, yeah, but they are way more committed than trained journalists. And they have this realm of expertise that's a passion, not just a realm of expertise. They will go above and beyond. They live, breathe, they find interviews that other people can't. Let's hire them, put them on air. And I had the same thing where they didn't want to go with the risk of that because they didn't have the credentials behind them. And I think we've seen that shift in the world where it's like the credentialed people, it's great that they have it if they have this other passion behind it as well. But you can't fake passion. And I think that's where people will do well in the world of AI as well, is that you cannot fake that passion, that human passion, that you feel this person really cares, because you emit a certain energy in a workshop or a talk that people feel, which is why I struggle a little bit with the Zoom effect of doing keynotes on Zoom during the pandemic, etc. Is like you want people to feel how much you believe this thing and you buy into it and you live it.
Welcome to the deep end of our conversation with Aidan McCullen. I'm Scott Wolfson. Once again, that is Kes Sampanthar. And we wanted to jump in here because, as I said at the outset, this was very, very lightly edited. And there would have been kind of an awkward jump cut at this point in the conversation. And that's because what we did in real time with Aidan is something that takes a little bit of explaining. We actually did a real-time game where we helped kind of create a startup with him and didn't think that it really fit within the innovation show. But Kes, maybe you can tell folks a little bit about that sim that we did with Aidan.
Look, innovation guru Aidan McCullen, we got to have him in real time create a startup for the Reinvention Summit. And we ran it through a simulation to see how his startup idea did. If you want to see more, like Scott said, check out Tech Tonic. We've got the whole show with the game embedded. You'll have a lot of fun. But here's a little bit about the Reinvention Summit. So one of the things which, you started this Reinvention Summit, and we want to unpack a little bit of how you got there. But I want to go back to the reading and something which is like sort of thinking. So one of the things which inspired me back in the day was reading Bill Gates's biography, and he used to have these reading weeks. And he'd take his books and he'd go, and I was like, oh my God, that's what I have to do. And I started creating different reading weeks anyway. So this has been with me. And I noticed at some point he flipped it to thinking weeks. And he's like, there's a whole documentary about it and like what he does. And one of the stories it reminds me of is, I think somebody was walking around Edison's, Ford, walking around Ford's offices, and there was this guy sitting with his feet up and literally doing nothing. And they asked him, it's like, so why do you have that guy? And he goes, well, yeah, about a couple of years ago, he came up with this idea, which, made us, hundreds of thousands of dollars. And look, I just let him do what he does, which is like, and that idea of like, he was thinking, that time to think. So when I think about reinvention, this is something which Scott and I have been, toying around, and we pitched it to KPMG. We were working on a design of it. And what we sort of did with Reader is executives we kept on hearing over and over, and we interviewed lots of them during the KPMG days, and it was like they didn't have time to think. Never mind time to read, they didn't have time to think. And it was like, can we give them that opportunity? So what I loved about the Reinvention Summit and what we got excited about sort of adding on to it was that, hey, can we bring a bunch of executives? Not only go to a conference, connect and network, but give them the time to think. Give them spaces to think. Give them inputs, right? And I love the, Gates, like he had whole staff like come up with all these things he has to read, and he like lands on his desk, right? That's how he came up with the internet, or pivoted to the internet, because these people had done this huge report, and it's like you're missing the thing which is right in front of you. And he read that, came back, wrote this memo to the company. It's like, we're pivoting, and like that input, the time to think, and then the time to do. Like I love Davos for doers. But to get to doing, you need the time to think and input and effort. So
yeah,
that was one of the inspirations.
Yeah, the neuroscience piece is interesting in that one of the things I learned about that is, when a company, and I get this, sometimes they'll go, we have a great boardroom here, we have a great meeting room, we'll just use here so we don't have to book a hotel, and we'll use our own caterers, etc. And actually, the thing that I'll always suggest is, what happens is, if you go to a foreign country, so you guys will come to Dublin next April, you'll experience a different country, your dopamine centers get turned on massively. So you start to be more open to new information in a new environment. That's why when you go somewhere else, oh, this is beautiful, etc. And you could be living in Dublin and not see it anymore, because your body, I saw you guys in one of your recent shows, you have such an influx of information that you don't have time to actually kind of go, well, what information am I letting in? It's because your filters are on so much so. So when you are used to an area, you shut off all that new information. So it's hard to take in new information all the time. You have to train that. You were talking about system 1, system 2 in a previous episode. So this idea of moving to not only a new environment, but a brand new country, and being able to then totally, everything's new. So your dopamine centers are firing like crazy. And then you add in this new information as well. So that new information is going to be absolutely beautiful for you, as long as the information is good, that is. But you're going to take it in a way that you could never do if you were taking it in your own office or watching it on a Zoom. I don't really get that, watching a conference on a Zoom call, but the difference is the people together, the environment, the feeling, the novelty, all that stuff leads to an amazing experience. And that's what I love about what you're doing, bringing the senior executives to a thinking week. And it's more than just the content. It's the whole, everything's thought about. And I think that's what will make it a remarkable event.
Yeah, I've noticed so when I moved to the US from England in 98. And I realized my best thinking happened on trips back to England. And it's like, you see this country, which I grew up in. I spent the first 28 years of my life kind of there. And then you see it through a new lens, because I've spent so much time in the US. And then when I go back to the US, I see the US again, like I was that Brit, walking off the plane and seeing all these new things. And I realized, like, the book I would read on the flight, plus all the things, like, I realize those are sort of part of that Think Week, and that's why we're so excited. No, I love the way you articulated that. I hadn't fully brought all those pieces back together.
Yeah. No, and it's again, I thank the show, because I do loads of shows on neuroscience and the brain because of that. You understand how the brain works, then you design stuff for the brain, not for people. You design for the brain inside their head. One thing to share is I did a show, I don't know if you caught that one on the Goodreads, Scott, was Eric Maisel. He had a book called The Magic of Sleep Thinking. And I was doing this anyway, but when I saw this book, I was like, I want to interview this guy about this. But I think people need to know, when they know this, you can learn even better. So if you say, for example, I write a weekly article, the night before I go to write it, I don't write it always on the morning, like I'll write it sometimes a week in advance. But the night before I'm going to write it, I'll read all the ingredients for that article. And I think about it like, literally like marinating something. You're putting everything in the pot and you're putting it in the fridge. So I'll read all that stuff, and then and just before bed, and then I go to bed, and it will inevitably marinate overnight, and then I won't straight away wake up in the morning and write it. I'll actually go to the gym, I'll marinate, and I'll read it again, the ingredients, just before going to the gym, let it marinate. And you always come up with some different insight that you wouldn't have had otherwise, just by letting it marinate, and given that specific time. And I think that's partly what happens is you can read the content, but if you're always under pressure and you're just going, I need to read this content, and your brainwave states are totally different. If you're in like high beta, you're not going to take the information in the same way as if you're in like a chilled kind of alpha wave state, where it's like, a book you're reading in a coffee shop. You're nice and chilled, having the coffee, reading a book. You take the information in differently, and I think that's a really important aspect that's often overlooked when people are thinking about thinking.
Add a little piece to it. Scott wants to jump in as well, because he has this whole thing about feeding your minions. So one of the things I worked out from the neuroscience of this, and this will help you improve your process even better. At the end, once you've sort of marinated, like read all the materials, ask questions, write down questions with no answers. So basically it's like API in the sense of application programming interface. This is my programming background. Like, I realized that questions were the way to actually get your brain to do it, because that idea of an open loop where your brain has this problem which is working on, so I studied the neuroscience of incubation and how does that actually work, and the classic studies out there, and then some of the neuroscience, and literally if you ask questions right before, so we do it before, I do it before I meditate. So I create 2 sleep cycles, as it were, because meditation sometimes acts as that. So I sort of, pick up a bunch of books and things, which are sort of like things I want to think about. Then I question, then I drop in and come back. And again, it's not just to come up with the answers or a new idea immediately, but that process allows you to actually create the mental frameworks. So around how you put knowledge in.
Nice.
Questions that creates an infrastructure for you to actually start putting information together.
You've taken this creator path, and you're really leveling it up now. You blogged, you've done podcasts, you wrote the book, and now you're doing this very, very large scale event with Reinvention.
Yeah. So I think many times members of the audience said, it would be great for us to meet up as in regular listeners, because I've connected them. I ran little kind of workshops where previous guests would come on and do a private workshop or private talk for members of the show, regular members. And it was a little bit of that, a little bit of frustration of actually, as being a keynote speaker, and I've had the privilege to speak at some great events, that I didn't feel the energy at the event. And I always feel the speakers are not included, as in the speakers are treated like they come in, they do their piece and they leave. And I was like, what if you could create an event that the speakers actually wanted to stay, that the speaker didn't feel like, this isn't worth my while, or I'm not part of this. So part of it was, if you could create something compelling enough for these great thinkers that are regular speakers around the world, that they would like to stay and partake in, then it's going to be extremely appealing to senior executives from all over the world. So the difficulty is to try and bring in, like we were talking about throughout this whole show, people who have the same strategic lens, so they feel they get it and they don't feel it's above their level of thinking in any way. So you want to have somebody who's open to that, open to the learning at the event, but also is already strategically upgraded to a certain point that they get it and they're not kind of going, well, what the heck's this all about? So there's that. And then really that the event has an energy behind it, like that people feel warmth and they feel connected. It's a networking event. It's an opportunity for people to really meet each other. And one of the things we talked about from a lens is the jobs to be done theory, is that it's it's satisfying the job for participants from different realms. So senior leaders, strategic leaders, also from consultants, people who work for themselves, solopreneurs, small team startups, scale ups, that there's something for everybody there that they're going to learn from. And we've done a huge amount, as you know, to work with the people speaking there, working with you guys to build your workshop that you're going to run, your alchemy that you're going to unleash, to create something that people just go, wow, that was awesome. So all those things are thrown in the pot. They're all the ones that are marinating. And now I'm going to use your trick of asking questions. How do I want people to feel when they leave the event is really the big question. And I want people to leave feeling that was the best event they've ever been at, that they really got something from, that they weren't just inspired, but they actually could take action on that inspiration, that they feel it was edutainment. So they also got a bit of entertainment there, that they met new people, that there was nothing that was filler. That's always a job to be done for me, that when you know that somebody's put into the lineup as a filler because they're a sponsor or something like that, drives me mad. And I know there's commercial responsibilities, believe me, but really resisting those things to actually make sure that every moment has been thought about, everything is combined together to create an overall 2-day story that people leave kind of going, I know why they had that person in there. I know why that person was placed at that specific point, that you're building these lenses, and across the day you come away with some type of transformation at any level that you're open to. So that's what we're aiming for.
Well, it's been a truly a remarkable journey for you to get to this point. And the fact that we have now joined your band of merry misfits, along with Nine Yards and Nadia and Rita McGrath and Seth Godin and Charles Kahn. I mean, it's really something, to use that word again, remarkable that you have pulled together. And it really is just such an absolute honor to be a part of pulling this together and doing something different. And we don't know if it will work, but everything that we're doing suggests that it will.
One thing I'm very aware of, there's so much goodwill towards this from the speakers, attendees, etc. And you know, I think about that book, The Mom Test, Rob Fitzpatrick, who I had on the show. And you know, the whole idea of your startup is, don't ask your mom because she'll tell you it's a great idea, is that you can create a false reality of progress, and to actually kind of go, is this something that is real, as in people really want to be part of it, or is it something that people are giving their goodwill towards in year one? I think that's a really important question to ask, because you go, well, what's repeatable here? And I'll be very, very honest. I said this to you guys from the start. I really do want to do it again. But if we do it and we do an unbelievable job, I'm also happy to go, that's it. It's done. It was amazing. We're all happy. We created something remarkable that we'll talk about forever. But it's too much of a stretch, or I don't think it's repeatable, or whatever, that I'm also happy to walk away. Like you said, I grip it tightly, but I hold it loosely. So I'm happy to let it go as well. So it could become something massive. I think it has the potential to. I'm open to that, but I'm also open to the whole idea of letting it go if it needs to be.
And I love, that to me speaks to this concept of that I like called the maybe mindset. The classic parable of the Chinese farmer who experiences good fortune and ill fortune and responds to all of it with that notion of maybe. And if I might offer one of the other mental models that I love so much when it comes to doing this kind of work and trying things that have never been tried before. Nobody has tried to do what you and we are doing with Reinvention Summit. It might be spectacularly successful and scale to a level none of us can imagine. It might be a spectacular failure. And it's the notion of putting in the work and doing it, much like if you've ever seen Tibetan monks create a sand mandala. Are you familiar with this practice? It's
No.
amazing. And this was, one of the many incredible stories I got to shoot when I was in TV news back in Salisbury, Maryland. There was a group of Tibetan monks that visited Salisbury University, and they created one of these sand mandalas. And it's incredible to watch. They spend days with these tiny brass cones, and they scrape them, and it makes this fascinating rhythmic noise. And the cones have brightly colored sand. And the cones, as they rub it, puts out one grain at a time. And they create, over the course of days, these intricate, beautiful, incredible sand mandalas. And when they're done, they scoop up all the sand and they take it to running water and they release it back to the stardust from which it came. Beautiful. And that, to me, is something I've done so many times in my career. It is that notion of the phoenix or the immortal jellyfish, and reinvention might be another incredible sand mandala.
Beautiful, man. I never heard that. I absolutely love it. Yeah, the journey is the product in a way. So yeah, and I mean that I'm totally up for that, man. That if it happens and it's a beautiful mandala at the end, and then we go, okay, start the water, start the hoses. We're done here. Then we'll do it. So we'll just go with the flow. The one thing I do know, and the Chinese farmer story says it is, I mean, whatever happens, happens. So just embrace it. If it works, it works. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. And I'll just go with the flow. I'm getting better at that. I'm not always great at that. I'm getting better at it and just going where the universe takes me.
Well, Aidan, this is it for our debut episode of the second season, a completely reimagined and totally reinvented Tech Tonic, the AI thought show with Kes and Scott. It's been absolutely incredible to have this conversation with you.
It was a pleasure, guys. Thank you for your time. And I always, as I said, and I'll say it here public as well, I'm so happy to have you involved in the Reinvention Summit. You're going above and beyond, and it's greatly appreciated. And I know we'll be able to repay you at the summit, but I hope to repay you in other ways in the future as well. Both you, Scott, Kes, and Rita as well, and all the team of Feliz. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Aidan. And as we have come to learn, so often innovation is its own reward, and this has been deeply, deeply rewarding. So thank you.
Yes, thank you, Aidan. This is amazing. We are so excited about the Reinvention Summit.
Let's build that sand mandala.
Because you and I have been around a lot of innovators throughout the course of our career. We helped create the innovation labs at KPMG and scale that globally, launch an innovation service offering at BCG. I've got to tell you, I had no idea, back last, May, whenever it was, when Rita McGrath introduced us to Aidan McCullen, realizing how many episodes he has done, what he's done, with this show. It fascinated both of us, but I've got to say, the guy is just absolutely the real deal and a true blue innovator. I mean, any takeaways from that conversation, what you learned, the show before the show and the book before the book, in that conversation with Aidan McCullen?
Look, like you say, he's a true innovator. Not just a talking head, talking to innovation and strategy leaders. Aidan lives innovation. Not only did he disrupt himself, moving from rugby into digital transformation before it was called that, into like this media, social media, and creating a show, but he's innovated over and over again. This is the thing which actually drew us in to even working with him on the Reinvention Summit. He wants to truly reinvent how summits and conferences are done. And that's what got us really interested. Look, he has lived a true innovator's life. And, that was an amazing experience to hear his story. Look, it's like, whether it's a deaf frog or, just understanding like how he faced so much resistance as he was going. It felt like listening to a lot of innovators' story. Like it's hard. It's hard because the pushback is real, but the reward is even bigger.
And, he's done what we've seen so many do, and we constantly connect to the hero's journey. And that's something, one of many, many common threads that we have with Aidan. And the notion that his book and what he has done with his book, Undisruptable, and in his podcast, it is like bringing back the elixir and sharing it and working so hard to get to that elixir. And we've realized that. We've tried to capture a lot of our thinking and share it as publicly as Aidan has done, learning in public, a truly curious human. Because any final thoughts, anything that really, really struck you before we wrap up this very special episode of the Innovation Show?
Look, it is amazing to hear his origin story. I always love trying to work out how somebody got to where they are. So really, peeling back the cover, hearing him tell his story of how he, overcame so many obstacles to get there. It has definitely been one of my favorite conversations we've had.
Well, for the Innovation Show, for Tech Tonic, the AI Thought Show with Kes and Scott, I'm Scott Wolfson, your friendly neighborhood curious human, joined as ever and as always by my best friend and partner in possibility, Kes Sampanthar. Stay curious, stay augmented, stay hungry, and stay foolish, our friends.